About this point. Well, good morning. How are we? See Pastor Nate in the front row. I just noticed you at the 10:30 service, 10:45. Good to have you with us today. My name is Chris Root. This is Pastor Nate. I'm one of the pastors here on staff, and I have ADD, and I get distracted really easy. Super excited to be here. Super excited that you guys are here. My job here is multiplication. I do all things that have to do with how do we make a difference in our city? How do we collaborate with churches? How do we plant churches? How do we connect with stuff that's going on around the world? And so that's what I do. And over the last several weeks, we've jumped into this series where we're talking about kingdom builders. And there's a reason for this is that, you know, one of the cool things, I've been here almost 10 years now. And over those years, just seeing what God is doing and how God's blessing. And we've just seen God do some pretty cool stuff. And in our little micro context, God's blessing and doing some things, and we're pretty excited about it. So we want to continue to be a part of what God's a part of, and we're praying for even more than just this, not so much like just like locally here, but even what's going on in the city and how do we make a difference around the world. And to make that happen, we have to continue to take steps. So we're doing this thing called Kingdom Builders where we're looking at the next phase and taking the next step. And I know that a lot of times when these kind of things happen, you have questions and trying to figure out, hey, how's this going to play out practically? And what does this look like? And looking for specific details. So what we're doing to answer those questions is what we call Vision Night. We've already had one and we have two more still coming. One of those is tonight. And one of those is Wednesday night. And we'd love for you to be a part of it. You can see up here on the screen, it gives those dates, but I'm gonna put right over there on that screen now. They did that on purpose to me. It's gonna say vision. You're gonna text vision to the number that's on the screen. You're just messing with me now, I get it, I know. So text the word vision to that number on the screen to let us know which one you're gonna be a part of. And here's the cool thing, both nights we're gonna be giving out some sweatshirts, really cool swag. But on Wednesday night, we're going all out. We're bringing the Chick-fil-A in. And I know some of you all about the Christian chicken. And y'all know I'm a Zaxby's guy. I believe in the Gentile chicken stuff over there. I feel like that's where God's people are supposed to be, is where the Gentiles are, spreading the word. There's no lines at Zaxby's like there is at Chick-fil-A. Now, is the chicken good? No, it's horrible. It's just easy to access. Now, I say all that for this reason. Wednesday night, no lines. You show up, Chick-fil-A's here, grab your Chick-fil-A and it's good. All right. We ready? I'm excited about this week. Yeah, y'all can clap a little. Let's get a little happy. 10:45, just wake up. You've had your coffee. So I'm going to answer the question that several of you, when I came in here today, and I've had emails about this, tons of questions. Chris, if you were wanting to rank department stores, would you help me to rank the department stores? Okay, thank you for those questions. I'm going to answer it today. Some of y'all don't get that. I'm not sure I do. It's just a way for me to get into telling you department stores. So department stores, I'm going to tell you my thought process on department stores. I don't know if this is really a ranking. This is more just thinking out loud, maybe is better, but I called it ranking. So number one, when we're talking about department stores, Target. Yeah. I know. Me and Nate are cool. And some of y'all listen, if you're political and stuff, just take a break for a second. We're at church. This is not, this is the most unspiritual part of the whole sermon is going to be right now, okay? So just trying to throw some jokes out here for a second. Target, if you think about it, Target is that place that actually takes a bath in the morning. That's the best way to explain them. When you go, you don't feel dirty. Target's the place that you go when you want to make sure you don't get murdered. I mean, that's Target. That's what it's about. Number two is Walmart. I know, listen, you're saying, how is it number two? Because there's basically only two. Walmart is the place you go when you just want to wake up in the morning, not take a bath, not change clothes, and go as you are. And it smells like people who haven't taken a bath in that place. Then there's Sears, which is they're gone, kinda. There might be one or two that are hanging on for dear life in Georgia. But for the most part, Sears is gone. Sears is like your grandparents. When they say, hey, they no technology, don't know technology, but they're like, we want to get on Facebook. And they botch it horribly, They're late all the time. They're outdated. It's terrible. Okay, that one didn't work. It doesn't matter. because we're on number 4. Roses. How many of y'all remember Roses? No, it's still around. Roses is still around. Does anybody not heard of Roses? Holy cow. Where you people been? Roses is still around. There's one in Rock Hill. So now I'm gonna tell you, it's number 4. It could be way lower. It could be. Roses is rough. Listen, my pawpaws, true story. Not calling pawpaw, so relax. I'm Southern. Pawpaw, every time he'd say to me, he'd say, hey, Chris, we're going to go to the dime store. And he was talking about roses. Now, old people know what the dime store is because about 4 or 5 generations ago, they called it the dime store because you could take a dime in there and go buy something. That's a true story. Now, Roses is still a dime store. Everything in there it's only valued at about 10 cents. Now, they're asking you to pay a whole lot more for it, but it's only a dime. Last one, and the most important one, and this is the whole point of this whole rant, Kmart. I know, they're no longer around. They're dead, they're gone. But listen, Kmart is what happens when Walmart takes drugs. That's Kmart, right? The K in Kmart stands for crack. That's what that stands for. That's a true story right there. Kmart was the place you went when you gave up on life. You know, I don't even care anymore. I'm going to Kmart. Now, they had these, y'all remember, some of you old people in the room, listen to me. You know, tell me, what was the one thing Kmart was known for back in the day? The blue light special. So they would turn this blue light on somewhere in the Kmart, and that's when they had a discount on something. And you'd go over there, hey, we got batteries on sale for 50% off at the blue light special on aisle 12. And you go. What Kmart did was they were having hard times over the last 10, 15 years. And so what they did, they took that blue light special and they put it on top of the building. They put the whole thing on sale. And apparently nobody bought it. So you know what they did? Bankruptcy. It's gone. So here's the true story. Now think about this. Kmart at one point was a very popular store. I'm old enough to remember when it was okay to go there. It was safe, it was cool, no problem. The problem, and it was basically like Target. You know, it was Target before there was a Target. Very cool situation. So what happened? Here's what takes place. They lost their vision, they lost their way, they lost their culture. What happens a lot of times in businesses, the bigger they get, you start forming this hierarchy. And these people up here at the top, they start focusing more on the money and how to make profits rather than keeping the culture and what it's all about. In other words, listen, they move away from the vision of the company and they start focusing on the vision of themselves. And anytime that happens, a quick collapse will begin to take place. It becomes kind of crappy. Listen, Kmart became the place that everybody started making jokes about. Comedians to sitcoms, they become the butt of all these jokes because this collapse that begins to happen with it. Now, why do I say all that? There's a point in time whenever we're a part of something, but we're no longer really a part of something. When we move away from what it's all about to something else. So we're there, but we're not really there. And that's what happened with Kmart as it had this slow demise that it began to be a part of. So why do I say all that? In our story today, that's what's taking place in Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, this problem is being seen in real time. The people of God who comes to this place, all of a sudden, they begin to shift their energy somewhere else. Remember, they loved God, they followed God into this place, they were with him, but all of a sudden, as Jerusalem began to be established, the Jews began to think about other stuff. Instead of being about the big thing, they became about their thing, and it began to slowly deteriorate. And what God said basically was, hey, look, you guys think you can do it better than me? Fine, I'm gonna take my hands off. And he takes his hands off and the place collapses. All the people are defeated, they're sent into exile, the walls are torn down, and 150 years then goes by now when this place is basically nothing. And here's the problem that I see today in the church. It's the same problem. I think that in the church, we go to church and we're about the church, but we're not really in the church. We don't really, I mean, we like the idea of it, but we don't really believe in it. We're not like bought into it. And the reason we say that is we see this spiritual decay that is happening all around us. I mean, there's nobody in here that would argue that we have not had this slow spiritual decay. You know, the number of people who claim to follow Jesus and know Jesus, that number is slowly inching down and down and down all around us. And I don't think, listen, I don't think that it's like, oh, whatever, it's waving off. I think people are just looking at the people who say they love Jesus and they're going, I don't really think they love Jesus. There's really nothing different about them than there is me. So why would I follow this great God? Just like back in the day, they made fun of this Jewish and Jerusalem people because why would God so great? It looks like it's collapsing and falling apart. And I would argue that what's happened in the church today, the bigger church, the big C, is there's a spiritual bankruptcy that's taken place, kind of collapsing. So what do we need to do? Those of us who say we love Jesus, what do we need to do? And I think that one of the things that when companies do something really well, they have this passion. They really focus on the big picture, this culture they create. And I think that we as the body of Christ, we should have the greatest passion. We have the greatest mission, and we should say, may I dare say, have a burden for something greater than ourselves to be a part of something bigger. And I want to dive into that. So today what I want to do is I'm going to share with you what it looks like when ordinary people all of a sudden get together, they rise up and they get on board and they get a burden and they put their hands to a God-sized task, something bigger than themselves. What then does God do? What then would God do? Would he step into it? And I think whenever we do that, ordinary people step into something, God does something extraordinary. So let's look at it. We're going to be in Nehemiah, which is where we've been all week, all series. And this week, we're actually in the second part of chapter 2, going into chapter 3. If you want to turn there, we're going to read starting at 17. But let me get us caught up from the last chapter to here. So we have Nehemiah, who, remember, he gets this word about what's going on in Jerusalem. He gets this big burden. He begins to pray. It's a God-sized task because it's like impossible because he has this job for the king. How would he ever go? So it's like, God, you're going to have to show up if this is going to happen. But he's burdened about it and he's praying about it and like God step into it. A miracle takes place as he commits himself to this big thing. God steps into the moment. He opens up the king's mind and his heart and he releases him to go and to build it. Not only does he say that he could go, which is miraculous on itself, I'm going to give you the tools and resources to make it happen. And he sends him on his way. And so he goes off to this situation and he finds himself in Jerusalem now, which is where we pick up. How's that for a chapter and a half? So now we're here in this situation and everything begins to shift. The book is about this wall, but particularly we're going to see that kick into place right now. All about this big gigantic wall around this place. The focus is the wall. And so that's what this focus is going to be. So right before we get to 17, here's what happens. Nehemiah shows up in town. And he doesn't make his presence known. He's there for about 3 days. On the third day, he gets up, he gets on his horse, and he begins to take an account of what's going on in the city. He literally rides his horse all around the city, going through the little boroughs, looking through all the details of where the walls collapsed here and there. And I'm assuming he's taking notes, planning out, strategizing. He does that all day, and then he comes back, and that's where we pick up at 17. And let's look at this together. 17 and 18. Then I said to them, you see the trouble that we are in. How Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates are burned. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem that we may no longer suffer derision. And I told them of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good. And this is that miracle that took place that God opened up the door for him to come. And also the words that the king had spoken to me, these resources he's going to give them. And they said, let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for the good work. Now, let me go back to the first part of 17 because I think something really interesting happens at the very beginning of 17. Take a look. Then I said to them, you see the trouble what? We are in. How Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come let what? Us build the wall of Jerusalem. Those two words are interesting. I know sometimes, we think, oh, it's just two words. How important could those words be? They're significant. Because think about it, the weird part of that statement is, to me, he's not from there. He's never lived there. I don't have any record that he'd ever even been there. He was a far distance off. It's been 150 years since that place failed to begin with. And here he comes into this city and he goes, hey guys, we have a problem. This is our problem, it's us. And the reason I want us to start at this point, the whole journey to us really doing what God wants us to do is what Nehemiah is doing right here. He owns it. If we're really going to be a part of what God wants us to be a part of, we have to own it. And let me just say it to you this way. There has to be a mental shift. So many of us, when we think about the situation in our culture, when we think about our community, the issues that we face on a regular basis, the things that we complain about, the things that we're upset about around us. What we oftentimes will do is we'll say, look what they did. Look at the problem that they're doing. Look what they did. Listen, if you do nothing, you did something. And until you step up and you own your part, even if it's I did nothing, then it's really hard to complain. It's really one of those deals. And I think the church makes that mistake all the time. We want to point, look what they did. It's not they, it's we, it's us. We have to own and take responsibility for what God is calling us to do. This is our city. This is our responsibility. This is what God has called us to do. And what we see here is he is owning it. Now, why is that important? Why does that even matter? Take a look at the last part of that same verse, chapter 3, verse 17, the second part, and where it says, come, let us build the wall in Jerusalem that we may no longer suffer what? Derision. Now, the interesting thing is, if you want to, in the Greek and Hebrew, and even if you were to define it out, even in with the dictionary, the derision means disgrace, the object of ridicule, a mockery. Nehemiah points out, here's the problem that we have. He begins to get into it. So he's taking ownership, and he says, we have a problem that this city is now in derision, that we're a mockery, we're a disgrace. And that's where the wall comes back in. Now, this is a different culture, a different time in history. In that day and time, a city or a community was known or had respect or whatever based on the strength of the city. It's totally different than today. We're not going to have militaries and stuff come rushing in from different sides of Fort Mill and do something weird here. But back in that day, you didn't have the technology and stuff that we have today. So they would build walls literally to protect the city. Because without the walls, you couldn't put a military all the way up around the city. People would just come into different places and they would raid and they would do whatever. And so they would build these walls. And the stronger and the better the military folks that were focusing on the entryways and the strength of the wall, it reflected who those people were. It began to be a recognition. Now remember, this is Old Testament. Now if you want to do that's the literal now to the metaphorical. For us, oftentimes we're known by how people perceive how strong we are, what we're doing. Do they have passion? Do they have vision? Is there something different about them? Do they stand out? Because Jerusalem for years stood out. They were significant. And now they're in ruins and they became the laughingstock. They were the Kmart of their time. And here we are today, the same questions are being asked. What about us and what about our circumstance? And all of this at the end of the day, I want to point out something that's interesting as he talks about let us build the wall of Jerusalem, is that Nehemiah, in this situation, when he starts talking about this wall, this is where the picture of Jesus comes in. So anytime you're reading the Old Testament, this is a great teaching point. When you read the Old Testament, you always look to see where it's pointing, and it's always pointing to Jesus in some way. There's a character. Nehemiah is the Messiah character here. He's the Jesus character in this story. So everything points to Jesus, then there's Jesus, and then everything past Jesus points back to Jesus. That's kind of the thread of the story. And in this thread, you have Nehemiah, who's this. He's the guy who's seated at the highest level with the king, right? He lowered himself and came down to the people to serve them. Come alongside of them. Invite them into something. Jesus in heaven sits at the right hand of the Father, comes down to us, to our mess, invites us in to something greater than ourselves. Hey, I want you to be a part of this. He invites us in, and he listen, I don't agree always with God, and that's okay. It doesn't mean I'm always disruptive. I think that God could have had a better plan, any plan that did not involve us. That would be my thought, because I know us, we're weird. We're weird people, and we do dumb things, and we don't represent well. But that's not the plan. The plan is he comes down amongst us and invites us ordinary, and in some cases less than ordinary people, into his story to do something extraordinary. And that's what is happening here with Nehemiah. He steps into this moment, he invites them in, and he says, hey, let's do this. Here's the problem. Come join me. Let's rise and build. Look at verse 18, the second part of verse 18. And they said this, let us what? Rise up and build. So they strengthen their hands for the good work. So they then join in and say, okay, let's do this. We're going to rise up. Let's go take this on, as he invites them into this journey. And that's what God is asking us to do. So I've already said this a second ago, but let me put it where you can write it on paper, what we need to know today. This is the big idea. When the ordinary do the extraordinary, God gets the glory. When the ordinary do the extraordinary, God gets the glory. And I just want to put out to you today, I fully understand some of you are probably thinking, man, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough. Do you know me? I have no skill sets. I don't really have a talent. I've never been to school, or I've never done theology. And we keep thinking of all these excuses of why we can't join God in doing something great in our city. It's always these excuses that, well, they'll do it. Somebody else will do it. I'll wait for them to do it. And that's the dumbest thing that's ever said. Because, well, look at them. There's plenty of people that are already doing it. I even think about it here at Life Point. When you look around and you come on Sunday, look at all the stuff's being done. Well, why would they need me? The reality is there's two problems with that. One, it's a flawed theory. We do need you. But number two, it's you're robbing what God has placed in you to be a part of. God is calling you to something, and it might not just be here on a Sunday morning. I don't know what the bigger story is, but start somewhere. Come on, let's build whatever that something is. You're being invited into it. And here's the thing, when ordinary people who recognize who they are, and I will say this, the more ordinary you think you are, the more less than ordinary you think you are, whatever excuses you come up with, say, I could never do anything, you are the most qualified person. When you look throughout all of Scripture, he takes weirdos and people who say they'll never do anything great. I mean, look at that guy. He's a murderer. And he says, that's the one I'm going to take and do something incredible with that person. And those are the people who led the movement, stepped up and did something great. So I just want to encourage you. Let us ordinary people rise up and build and join God in what he's doing, and he'll do something extraordinary. And then when he does, when he takes us weird, ordinary people and he does something extraordinary, guess what happens? He gets all the glory. And that's the big part of the story. So how does it happen? How do we begin? Let's go to chapter 3. The wall now is going to be built. How is this going to take place? What's the process? I love this first part, very first one. It starts out, the wall gets built. Chapter 3, verse 1, right? The wall's starting to be built. Notice how it starts. This is the only one I'm going to stay on. The rest I'm just going to go through quickly. But let me just sit on this one second. Then Elisha, the high priest, he rose up with his brothers, the priest. They built the sheep gate. They consecrated it, and they set its doors. So let me say this first, and then we'll dissect it. I want you to write this down. Leaders go first. Elisha is the high priest in this time. So here they say, okay, let's build. The very first one it says is Elisha, the high priest, says, okay, we'll start, I'll start. And he gets right to work. And it starts with him. Leaders go first. Leaders lead the way. They set the tone, and people then come behind them. But let me point out some interesting things in this text. Let me see. Let's put up the text. Then Elisha, the high priest, rose up with his brothers, the priest, and they built several interesting things. And they built the sheep gate, and they consecrated it and set its doors. So I want to look at all three of those. The sheep gate I find very fascinating. The sheep gate being basically where the sheep would come in, and these were the animals that would then be used for sacrifices. And if you're not familiar with the Old Testament, the way people were made right, there is no Jesus. Remember, everything's pointing to Jesus. The way to be right, something had to die to pay for your sin debt, which then sets up Jesus, the ultimate one who's going to die to pay your sin debt. So the sheep gate represents the sacrifices that are made for us to be made right. So the very first part starts at the sheep gate. The problem that got them into this mess, all these people who are no longer grabbing onto their faith and following God. And you remember they started to move away and do what they wanted to do. And God said, fine, if you want to do what you want to do, I'll take my hands off. And he said, what it's going to start is we've got to get back to what made us right and makes us righteous. Our focus must be on him. So it starts at the sheep gate, be made right. They then consecrated and set its doors. They consecrate this first part of the wall, what they're basically saying, which is the sheep gate part, remember? Because consecration, another word that's used for consecration, or they would use for consecration, is holy. This place is holy. And what's interesting about this, we need to be made right, and we need to worship. And the point of this being, the wall is going to start here. They're going to build the wall, and it's going to come back to the sheep gate, and they're going to finish there. Everything needs to be about us being right, staying right, and worship. Never forget, you got into this mess. The reason the walls are down, the reason that we look weak and stupid and pathetic is because we forgot the one who got us here. We forgot the extraordinary, so God just gave us the ordinary, and that's what they got. So God said, hey, start here. Get right, stay right, worship, bring me glory. Cool part, what it leaves out, and this is interesting, and it set its doors. In every other case where these gates are being built all throughout it, every other gate, it talks about locks. It talks about bolts, locks, and bars. The only gate with no locks, no bolts, no bars is the sheep gate. Everyone can come in. You are not kept out of God's holiness. He wants you to come in. He wants you to be made right. And why is this such a big deal? And why am I sitting on this one verse? Because if we're going to do anything extraordinary for God, we cannot take our eyes off of the purpose of why we're here. It is the same thing. Like I said, in this, it's pointing to Jesus. Jesus comes. We, the church, now exist with Jesus in the past, right? But we're pointing back to him because nothing significant will happen in our city outside of the person of Jesus himself. It has to be about him. And then I love the rest of it. Let me just run through some of these cool stories that happens afterwards. Verse 2, it talks about these people who didn't even live in the city. There are people not even in the city, not even a part of this group, who participated in the work. And what I found is whenever God gets involved and stuff starts happening and people start raising up and God's name is made great again, people will begin to want to collaborate and work together to do something great for the kingdom. The biggest problem in the church today is we become isolated silos all over the place. And churches are no longer working together to bring God glory. This is a team effort. They collaborated for the glory of God. The next section mentions 3 different people who are then mentioned in other places of the wall. If we're going to do this great, yes, you're going to have a responsibility. There's a wall that you might want to jump on. You're part of this metaphorical wall that we're trying to do here at Life Point and in our city, and you're building it. But what happened was those same people are mentioned in other parts of the wall. So like they're working here, but it's like, well, they need help over there. Well, we're going to go help build that part too. They're just going to jump in and do what needs to be done. Throughout it, it talks about perfumers, goldsmiths, merchants, as well as priests, rulers, men, women, all participating in the work regardless of their expertise or their experience. They didn't let any of that get in the way. They had no expertise, experience of building walls. It's a wall. How do we build it? I mean, I'm a perfumer, and I don't even do that well. And you want me to build a wall? They did it. They just said, it doesn't matter what my skill sets is. I don't need skills. When I'm called, God enables me to do what I'm called to do. I just follow the call. And so they jump in, they're building whatever they need to build. It talks about a ruler and his daughters worked on the wall. It was all ages, all people, families, everybody stepping in to do whatever was required to be done. And my favorite one is the dung gate. It was repaired by, the dung gate is repaired by the son of a ruler, first of all. So here's a ruler, his son said, and he should be, significant, important. He said, no, I'll do it. And this is a place where they opened it up to the trash heap in the valley of Hinnom or Gehenna, which you guys, if you have a little bit of Bible history, know this is the area that Jesus talks about. It's always smoldering. It's where all the trash and the poop and all that goes out to. Always smoldering and burning, and it smelled like poop. Jesus refers to this place, anytime he's referring to hell, he refers to it in this same verbiage. And the reason I say that is there are going to be some crappy jobs that need to be done. And some of us just got to step up and step into the crap and do whatever it takes, because ultimately, there's somebody else who walked through hell to make things right for us. And so what is your excuse? What do you need to do? Very simple. Rise up and go. That's it. Rise up and go. There's no excuses. There's no longer any reason to say, I can't, I'm not able. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is, it might be small, it might be big. Stop making excuses. Some people are going to do the smaller things. Some people are going to do bigger things. But all together, these ordinary things, anything that you do is not going to be extraordinary till God steps into it anyway. Your part is just to be obedient and do whatever it is. But do something. Rise up and go. God is calling you. That is not for debate. And you're saying, oh, he must be talking to somebody else. No, I'm talking to you. God's calling you. The question is where is he calling you? Step into what he's calling you to do. I'm going to close with one more. Verse 5. It says this. And next to them, the Tekoites repaired, but their nobles would not stoop to serve their Lord. I find that funny. The nobles are not going to stoop down to do this. The important people, that's what they were the nobles. They thought a lot of themselves, and that God's work was beneath them. That what they were doing was more significant than what God was calling them to be a part of. I wonder sometimes if we miss out on something extraordinary because our mindset is messed up. Somehow that we think that the other things that we do in our life, and those things are important, but those things we do in our lives are enabling us to do what God is calling us in our purpose. Never put yourself above what God is calling you to do. It is the most honorable and highest call, which is why all throughout Scripture, now sometimes we blur those lines and try to make pastors and stuff like they're somehow higher. Do not make that mistake. The called are significant, and that's all of us. Those who step into the call, that is a significant call. And so here's what I'm going to do. I had this thought in my head. I envision in my head that churches, our church, would raise up and take responsibility for our circle of accountability here in this city, our community. Now, I can't speak for other churches. I can't speak for other people. Here's what I know. We can lead at Life Point. At Life Point, we can take responsibility. We can step up and do the work. And that's what I think God's calling us to do. Hey, it's time. It's time for us to step up and to do something significant. And here's the interesting thing. I think some people already have. I think they already are. So I think if I was to pick up a book today and I'm reading much like it was in chapter 3 as it goes down the list of people building the wall, that it might read something like this. Craig Cox, one of the elders, rose up with his wife, Kathy. They began investing in couples who wanted to work and improve their marriage. They sacrificed their time and countless hours teaching, coaching, and praying over married couples. Michelle Rauscher walked the streets in her neighborhood. She met family after family, built relationships with people, became a friend, helped neighbors to meet and to know one another, in many cases for the very first time. She now leads a Bible study regularly for those who want to attend. Lily Wilkinson, she's an 8th grader, shows up early on Sunday mornings to set up the children in the Discovery Point areas. She also volunteers and serves in the elementary, overseeing some of the classes and the kids. Terry Coobs, burden for those who need someone to come alongside them, mentors and empowers single moms and helps them to learn skills that will get them a job. Oh, but Terry has worked many parts of the wall, leading a life group, greeting on Sunday mornings, and helping start the school mentorship program. Ryan Boykin, she joined the housekeeping team. She comes to the building, takes care of the floors and all the cleaning needs in Discovery Point and even other areas as it's needed. Bev Barney buys snacks and drinks for the impact leaders that are part of the First Impressions team on Sunday mornings. Jeremy Wellman, a piano player that chooses to not lead on a stage but leads behind the scenes, the audio team, a person only noticed when something goes wrong. Rachel Yunt, a counselor who volunteers to travel to Honduras to help train, counsel, and encourage pastors and their wives. Megan D'Amico hosts the online chat on the live stream on Sundays to make sure that people get connected with other people who are not physically able to join us on campus. And Scott and Mary Cumming, oh, they have a heart for people, messed up people, people with habits, hurts, hang-ups. So what did they do? They rose up and they started to celebrate recovery to provide a place of healing for people. Listen, I'm thinking 10 years from now, how long? Maybe we're dead and gone. is your name going to be in here? What's your name going to be? What part of the wall are they going to talk about that you built? I think my prayer is this. Listen, if we as the church begin to have a different vision for something bigger than ourselves, bigger than just this moment. God, give me something bigger. I want to be a part of something bigger myself. Here's what I think is going to happen 10, 15, 20 years from now. In our city, in our community, we're going to look back at this group of people who said, let's rise up, let's build. In our city, we're going to see the teenage pregnancy rate go down. We're going to see the divorce rate go down. We're going to see people being in prison go down. We're going to see the schools not just being great in education, but great at every level, with kids having a chance at life. People are going to be stepping into their purpose. No longer is there going to be, we're not going to allow division in our city, because we're going to commit ourselves around unity and love and making God's name great again. I envision a day when God's people stand up and we are beautiful again. Our walls are strong. Let me pray over you. Father, move in this place. God, help us to step out and take that next step that you're calling us to. God, I don't know what it is, but God, may we begin somewhere doing something. And God, I know this, if we'll just step out and honor the call to do something, that you'll show us our one thing, that you'll show us our purpose, and you'll allow us to be a part of something extraordinary. God, that's our prayer. God, may you do something so great at Life Point that only you get the glory. We pray this in the name of Christ. Amen.
Can you help me thank Pastor Chris? Excellent job.